Hello, hello, and welcome to another forecast. This is for the Scorpio new moon on the 13th of November, depending where you live. And just a reminder that this is set up for where I live. So the way you see this kind of clock face might look different where you're from. So don't worry too much about where you see the planets in the chart. Like if you see that this full new moon is happening in the 10th house, that may not be the case in your part of the world. It's more important that you go look at Scorpio in your chart, wherever that is, and relate it to that. Or if you're a little further on in your astrology studies, you can draw up a chart for your part of the world and see what sort of house area that falls. Because when we do this kind of astrology, it's called mundane astrology, which is drawing a chart for a particular event, like in this case, the new moon. But where we bring that into being more personal for us, as I say, is if you take that into your chart. So look, where is 20 degrees of Scorpio in my chart? And any of the planets that we see situated, the first place to start would be just to look at anything at 20 degrees of Scorpio. So if you are just starting your astrology, but you have a copy of your chart, look for that. Then if you're starting to get better at your astrology and you want to push yourself a little further, you might want to see what is squaring 20 degrees of Scorpio. So those are the hard aspects, opposition and square. So you would look at the other fixed signs. Scorpio is a fixed sign, so we would go to the other fixed signs, which would be Aquarius, Taurus, Leo. Look if you have anything at 20 or thereabouts of the fixed signs. So this is just a way to show you that there's constantly a way to up level your own practice, but you don't have to up level your own practice. You're just going to meet yourself where you're at. So if you come on and you're thinking, this is Greek, what the heck is she talking about? Then you're just not ready to understand what the heck I'm talking about. That is absolutely fine. You can get the essence and the energy through this forecast and many other brilliant forecasts out there. And it's always good to hear because there's different lenses. You know, each astrologer will look at something with their own lens based on their own experience and their own learnings, etc. So when you start to get a little bit more confident and comfortable, you can also look at these things through your own lens, which for me is first choice because you're living through your own lens. So it's really great to get outside perspectives and integrate what works for you and release what doesn't work for you, and then to start to develop your own ability to discern what you feel this energy has in store in general, and even more specifically has in store for you. Where are your lessons to be gleaned, basically? So back to the chart, we have a Scorpio new moon. New moon is always when sun and moon come together in the sky. That's why we don't see the moon properly, but because she is being covered by the sun. Any planet too close to the sun cannot really be seen because the sun is so bright. And that is really his essence, and his energy is this soul light. He doesn't even intend for it. It just is. And that is also what the sun sign in our own chart represents for us, is just that brightest soul self. So the moon comes to meet the sun, and they are a real dynamic of yin-yang energy, day and night, sun and moon, water and fire. And whenever they come to this new moon phase, they are like intimate lovers at that moment, whispering in each other's ears, talking about things that need to be addressed. And we would always put the lens of what is the new moon. So this is a Scorpio new moon. So the two of them are having these intimate, deep, emotional investigations at a Scorpio new moon. And if we want to look at, well, what do we do with that? Sun and moon in the sky are doing that. So how does that impact me? Then you say, well, where are those spaces in my life internally, first of all, that I need to access both my divine masculine and sacred feminine, and then get into that space of having those deep, tough conversations, going into the darkness to find the pearls of wisdom. Where do I have to do that in myself? And also, where do I have to do that within my relationships? So that's always how you'll bring it into your world. If we're not doing the work internally, and even if we are really, things will often reflect outside of us. So let's say you're dealing with some anger, suppressed anger deep inside you, and you are unable to express it because it's suppressed. You might find that you come into relationship with someone who is expressing very angrily at you, or can elicit that angry expression from you. And there is something magical and alchemical in that, because it helps us to work through something. So really everything that we create in our external environment, including all of our relationships and how they roll, it's an inside job. The more we work on that problem, or not even problem, that aspect of self, the less it has to get hard on us from the external. And even though that seems really well, now that I know I'll just do that, it's not so easy in practice. We'll all be working on it for the rest of our days. And as soon as we work through one thing, polish up one facet of that diamond, there'll be another thing that will come up for us to be, oh, now this is where I need to look, because now that I've peeled back that layer, I see where it actually, another route to how I got there. So we'll always be working. That's kind of what it's about. But Scorpio is an intense sign. It is a very deep dive into things, and it's not afraid to be aggressive when needs be. And it's very investigator kind of energy, and scrutinize, go down, go down, go down, keep going through the layers. If you think of Scorpio as a surgeon, that surgeon is going to be in there cutting until they cut away whatever needs cutting away. And sometimes with Scorpio, because it's a fixed water sign, sometimes it gets so obsessive and fixated that it doesn't know when to stop. So again, you would say, do I have strong Scorpio? And if I do, how does that feel for me when I hear that? Does that fit me? Or if I don't have strong Scorpio at all, but I have Scorpios in my life, that may fit them. But whether you are strong Scorpio, then this is obviously going to be a strong lunation for you, or not, you're going to have it somewhere in your chart. You may not have any planets there, but you're going to have a part of you that needs to work through this. The other thing about Scorpio is its non-ruler is Mars. Its traditional ruler, is Mars. And Mars is in Scorpio, pretty much conjunct the sun and moon here. So this is particularly strong in a sense of being able to do something about whatever that intimate conversation brings up between sun and moon. Now, what do we do about it? Let's not just sit here and talk about it. How do we take action? Because Mars really wants us to go and get things done. But he can be pretty inflammatory. He can be pretty aggressive and harsh. Mars can be harsh. So again, if you're not prepared to go to those places and do those things, Mars might give you a bit of a kick or a bite, or hold a spear in your back, because the idea is that you need to make these changes. We all need to make these changes. If we're making them, probably the pushiness or the inflammatory aspect of Mars will be less. And we are where we are. So it's not about judging yourself because you didn't get enough from it, or you didn't surrender to it, or you didn't take the right action. It's rather just to go, oh, I see where I could have done more, or whatever the case may be. Try to be gentle with yourself as you start to learn astrology, because it's really easy for us. Well, I don't know. For some of us, we're not accountable at all. And then it's easy to go, oh, that's a whole load of BS that means nothing. But if you are somebody who takes these things and tries to work with them and get constructive, you can get, and I speak from experience, you can get pretty hard on yourself at times about, now I know I need to do better, but sometimes it's not as simple as that. So please try to just be aware of those things as you move through this. And I don't know if you get my newsletter yet, but you can go and subscribe on my website. The link's below. It's free. But my whole concept this month is very much about the body. And I think so many of us are going too hard at whatever we're doing, whether that's mentally, emotionally, physically, and our bodies are starting to say, enough. And this is the thing I'm seeing in a lot of my healing sessions. It's coming up with us collectively. I'm experiencing it personally. So it seems to be a strong theme for us to look at. And remembering that the opposite sign to Scorpio is Taurus. And we are just coming out of that. By the time you're at the new moon, we're at the end of eclipse season. But the 2 weeks prior, we had that big Taurus eclipse, which was the final eclipse in the Taurus Scorpio axis. And in fact, this lunation though not an eclipse, ends the eclipse season. And also this lunation is the first time in a long time that we haven't had a Scorpio eclipse when it's been a Scorpio lunation, because we were in Taurus Scorpio eclipse season since the end of 2021. So as we get to this moon now, it's like almost, because it's an intense sign, but it's almost like the intensity level is dropped, but also not dropped because Mars is there. And it's almost uncomfortable, I feel, for this moon, for us to try and consolidate. It is also opposite, very tightly opposite Uranus at 21 degrees. So Uranus would be exactly opposite in between Sun, Moon at 20 and Mars at 22. And Uranus is a bit of a revolutionary. He's a freedom fighter. And even though it's nice to think of the concept of freedom and revolution, if you are finding the freedom, the other side of that is it's war, really, isn't it? A revolution usually means that there's two camps, and one wins and gets freedom, and one loses something, whatever that may be. So when Uranus is in the mix, as he is very strongly now, there is going to be something that we may win and something we may lose. And Uranus has a lot to do with accidents, and I really feel like those are showing up quite a lot at the moment as well. And again, accidents that tell us with our body, I'm done, no more of this. Myself included, I have experienced this, but also a lot of clients, a lot of people I'm speaking to. So this is really a time that we need to do the difficult work, Scorpio, or pay the price for not. Often at the moment with Uranus and Taurus, the body space, it will show up in our body, and it could show up from an accident. In my case, it was pulling the ligaments in my foot. I'm hearing about a lot of ankle things, which I also think might link to the fact that Pluto over here is almost coming back in January. He comes back into January. I think it's January. Into Aquarius, and Aquarius rules the ankles. And so as we try to like eke forward and back with this Pluto energy of transformation and change, we're moving from Capricorn, Pluto and Capricorn, which rules the knees and the bones, skeleton, the skin, into Aquarius, the calves, the ankles, the Achilles tendons, and circulation. So I'm very aware of that every time somebody goes, I just rolled my ankle last week, because you know, when you have an injury, then suddenly everyone's telling you about how they've done the same injury, and suddenly it's popping up everywhere. That's definitely been happening. And it keeps coming to my mind about the Pluto Aquarius energy. But we also, aside from Uranus, we also have Jupiter in Taurus. So even though Jupiter is not opposite, he's at 9 degrees here, so he's not opposite this new moon, he still brings his big self into the energy of Taurus, and he is expanding the lessons of Taurus. So even though the eclipse cycle is now just moving on, there are other aspects that are happening within those two archetypes, Taurus and Scorpio, that are really making sure that we don't just go through a big bursting open kind of wormhole or portal, which eclipses are, and a bigger eclipse cycle. Obviously, we've been in this portal every sort of 6 months for a while. It didn't just burst us open and then we can quickly put back our blinkers on like the ox in the ox wagon and pretend none of that stuff was actually exposed and carry on the way we've always done it. But instead, that we actually keep going. We keep realizing one foot in front of the other, slow and steady wins the race. We're building a new Earth, Taurus. And in order to do that, we have to bring out all the skeletons from the closet. We need to address the toxicity and the things that have really been festering, Scorpio. So that's a very, very strong dynamic. We also, for me, it feels like we've got a little supportive net almost holding us with the outer planets or the modern planets. So the modern planets are the ones that were invented, were not invented, was only seen, found, recognized in the sky when we had telescopes. And I always think of Aquarius also as the telescope, whereas Scorpio is the microscope. And so that was Uranus first, Uranus over here, we were just speaking about him, and then Neptune was found and spotted and recognized, and then slowly over time integrated into our psyches as we became able to visibly, well, not with the naked eye, but to see these planets. Their energy was ready to start influencing us. And then it takes a while for us to kind of really assimilate that. But now for a long time, we have had these planets assimilated. So then it came Neptune, and then it came Pluto. And so those three are all in sextile. So you have Pluto in sextile. This is sextile. You can even think of it a little bit like sex. It's like a meshing, a good connection. Sextile, Pluto sextile Neptune, Neptune sextile Uranus. So for me, they're like a little net holding space for some of the big changes that are happening. And they're coming in with their modern energy, which is it's very revolutionary, because the first one was Uranus, who is about revolution and change. The next one was Neptune, who is about ideals and dreams and visioning into something better, different. And then Pluto, who is all about transformation. So they're slow moving, heavy hitting planets. And as they hold space in a complementary conversation with each other, it's like they're saying, sure, these people are going through a lot. So let's just try to gently hold them whilst they change, whilst they grow, whilst they transform, whilst they revolutionize, and whilst they imagine something better. And then action it, which is easier said than done. We also have Mercury, who's finally bringing us a little bit of fire. There's not a lot of fire in the sky. The previous lunation, that Taurus eclipse, very, very earth, water heavy. So the feminine, and the feminine energy, the sacred feminine, or the divine feminine, has definitely been pushing for some time now. And we're all trying to figure that out. Be us in a female body or a male body or whatever, that's not really about that. We're all trying to integrate this shift from patriarchy, and we're not going into matriarchy. We're trying to find a better balance between the two. So that last lunation was very feminine heavy. And I don't think we had any fire in that last lunation. And now Mercury has moved into a fire sign, Sag, starting to bring in a little bit of fire. We have had Chiron in Aries for a long time, and we do have the North Node in Aries. That's fire. But for the most part, in the traditional planets, I think we had nothing in the last lunation. I didn't just double check that, so I might be wrong, but I'm almost sure. And so Mercury at 4 degrees of Sag is forming a very nice, tight and aspect of sextile as well. You can see how this is a thicker blue line than these, because it's tighter orb, closer in that conversation. And so Venus and Mercury are what we value, what we love. Venus, how we think, what story we tell. Mercury. And they're also really supporting here in air and fire. So bringing a little bit more masculine, because we're still water dominant for this reading, not as earthy as the last one, more water. The air is starting to come in stronger. And with that, the earth is dropping off a little bit, but we're still pretty low on fire. So I quite like Mercury, our storyteller, coming in there with a bit of fire and going, come on, let's find a spark. Let's fire the story up. Let's get going with our new narrative. Because a lot of these big changes that are happening for us collectively and individually, it's like a slow turn of the wheel. And in hindsight, we can look back at things in history and go, wow, look at that. That was amazing, whatever happened there. But if we actually look at the amount of time these things take, it is usually years. And there's a build-up to something. Then there's the years of, whoo, that was a world war or a revolution or whatever it was. And then there's the post years where everyone's trying to recover. And if you look at the big span of it, it's not a year or two. It's probably more like a decade. So we have to be patient and realize we're in the thick of it. But we're doing the work, and well, hopefully most of us are, because we actually only need most of us to do the work. We just need to get to that, what's that phrase? Can't think of it now, where once you hit a certain number, then the shift happens. So we really need to just all be getting to that capacity. But anyway, so Mercury and Venus are supportive in this because they're having this good connection, even though in the actual lunation, the intensity of Scorpio and Mars there as well, and the intensity of the opposition to Uranus, the actual lunation is quite tough, but the support system around feels like we could lean into that to kind of give ourselves a little bit of reprieve and take back some of our power, because Scorpio does like to take back power anyway. Pluto is in eking out those last degrees of Capricorn. That is also power. And it's as it's shifting, it's taking the power away from the top heavy kind of top down power into power to the people, into Aquarius. But we do have a strong theme of slow down a bit. We also have Saturn at 0 degrees, having just stationed direct before this lunation at 0 degrees of Pisces. And there's a lot to be said in our work of dreaming forward when Saturn's there and putting the structures in place for that. So even though Saturn is widely square this new moon, I mean, I wouldn't even feel too strongly into the square. So there is a little bit of resistance to the actual Scorpio stuff and Saturn trying to say, well, here's the structure. I think that collectively for the next few years, while Saturn is going through Pisces, we are trying to dream up the new structure. I'm actually just getting the sort of image of fish bones, you know, and they're fine. They're much more fine and gentle than, let's say, ox bones. And because Pisces is the sign of the fish, and Saturn is not at his most comfortable there because he kind of wants more solid structure. But there is something to be said about looking at the structure within the watery context. So let's look at those beautiful fine fish bones and realize that they do hold structure, but also allow for a little bit more fluidity, which of course Pisces brings in a lot of fluidity. It is a mutable water sign. Okay, before I get too complicated or too long, I'm going to call it a day. Thank you so much for being here with me. I really appreciate your time. All your likes, shares, follows, subscribes, comments, etc. are really very valuable to help with these algorithmy things that are something new in the AI world. Well, not that new anymore, but you know, something we all have to learn to deal with and understand a little bit. I'm not very techie, so this is a thing I'm trying to accept. So yes, I would very much appreciate any of those ways of your support through likes, shares, follows, subscribes. Link down below if you would like to get in touch with me for any personal sessions. And again, thank you so much for your time and so much for watching. Have a beautiful new moon season in Scorpio. And remember to set your intentions always at new moon around the theme of Scorpio and whatever that sort of triggers in your life right now. Thanks so much. Have a beautiful month.